One. Good morning. My name is Donnie
Good.
Glover, and you're here with the BlackUSA.News morning show. We're here with the man, the myth, the legend. Let me tell you something. Before I bring him up, we've had a lot of leaders here in the city of Baltimore pretend to care. But this is a gentleman who is, it's always a pleasure when you see people doing the work after their tenure, and that's Carl Stokes. We got a good morning from Alexis Coates. Good morning, Mr. Coates. Good morning, Carl Stokes. How are you? Got
Good
my
morning,
coats
sir.
on.
How are you, Donnie? I'm glad to be
Stokes.
with you this morning. Thanks for inviting me on.
The pleasure's all ours. How have you been?
Oh, I've been doing fine. I've been doing fine. I've been coping like everybody else in this pandemic, almost 2 years now, huh? But I'm doing okay. I'm still getting out at least once for lunch at our favorite proprietor's cafe. So I'm doing well.
So, what have you been up to lately?
Say that one more time.
What have you been up to lately?
Lately, professionally, I've been doing a little consulting with three or four people or entities around the Baltimore area, and keeping busy with that, and family. Just enjoying family, and everything is well though.
So, do you miss politics?
No, I don't miss. That's funny. I miss the people, and very interestingly, and quite frankly, very flatteringly, when I go out my front door, often my neighbors say Carl or Mr. Stokes. We got trash in the back, and I'm looking at them like, what's that got to do with me? But it is flattering that people say even there's trash in the back. That means they think I have some influence with somebody to get the trash up. But so it's all good. It really is. I don't miss the politics of cruelty, or I guess cruelty is too harsh a word, but just the fighting that sometimes take place, especially among folk who should be working together. Sometimes we're an all Democratic city, as you know, but sometimes, folk act like there's Republicans on one side of the room and Democrats on the other, and folk are just fighting each other instead of working together to solve some of the real problems in the city, like poverty and education, violence, things that we could work on together. But there are some administrations, not all, who distance themselves from people who could really help because they weren't on their ticket, or they weren't supporters of them doing a competitive primary, for example, when, immediately after any such competition, folks should come together in the same room and figure out, who's going to do what to make this work. That we've elected a leader among us all to do the coordination of it all, but we're not gangs. We're not to go to our separate corners at the end of the day, or have people put out of politics for 4 years while waiting for another chance to fight to get back in. That doesn't make sense in a city that is all black for the most part. Certainly 65% is black, and much of that population is living in poverty. Uh,
I want you to take a moment and tell me, and bear with me, why did you get into politics?
so it was quite a while ago, back in thinking 82 or 83. At that time, our districts, we only had six council districts as opposed to uh, the number now, which is 14 districts. We only had six districts, and we had three persons representing each district. So each election, you would elect three representatives for your neighborhoods, your district. So make this long story short, I was a business person. I owned a small chain of retail clothing stores, and I had been active in the sickle cell clinic and running basketball programs and tutoring programs in my immediate neighborhoods and as well as across town. And so there was an election, and there were, I think, 19 people running to fill the three vacancies or the three seats in the old second district. And I didn't know 19 of the 20 people who were running. And I was very active in the community. So I saw that as many people who saw an opening or two because there was a vacancy, and people just rushing in to serve, people who didn't live in the district, weren't active in the district. And so with some ego, I said, I can do a better job than these people who are running to represent my neighborhood. And that's how I got at it.
Are you pleased with the results?
Well, the first time I ran, I lost, I think by 400 votes. It didn't matter, I lost. But then I decided right there I was going to run 4 years later. And so I wrapped up my business, I sold the business, et cetera, and I prepared myself to run and win 4 years later, which with God's help, I did.
So now what?
Well, I think politics as an elected is something that I've moved past now. But I am still active in not only church, but civic activities, working with a CDC, community CDC. I'm trying also to continue to work in terms of education, which is amazingly difficult in this city, where the public education system is very poor for Black children. Particularly poor Black children, but all Black children. Many instances, people are leaving our city. The people who are leaving Baltimore are, for the most part, the Black middle income. That's who's leaving the city. The folk who have had a decent education, whether it's high school or college, who don't feel that they can safely and adequately find schools for their children. And so it is the Black middle income families who are leaving the Baltimore city to find better education for their kids. And they're looking for safety too, but the first thing they're looking for is to protect their child in schools.
What do you think? I mean, clearly, I would imagine you've seen something that Fox has done. They're on Baltimore City Public Schools every single day. What do you think of Fox's coverage of Baltimore City Public Schools?
I think overall, it's a good light shining on a very significant problem. I think there are times when they overdo it. I think there are times when they sensationalize it. I think that that causes quite a pushback from some quarters. But at the same time, it is not uncovering, it is exposing just how serious there is an attempt to defraud, if I could use that term, the public. They're, for the most part, not doing a great job. There are, I would say, 20, 25 schools out of 180 so schools that are actually more than adequate, doing a great job in educating our young people. But out of that larger number, these are not schools that are mediocre. These are schools that are really bad. Right now, I think we have maybe 15% of our 8th grade population are what we call grade proficient, meaning that the young people in the 8th grade are failing 8th grade standards. They can't read at 8th grade level. They can't do math at 8th grade level. They're actually around 3rd grade, 4th grade, and some are even lower than that in terms of their ability. And so what that one media station is doing is to shine a light. What I'm disappointed about is that pretty much no other media except Be More News is picking up on what is going on in our schools. It's amazing that because this particular media is thought of as a pariah, both among some folk as well as other media, that because they are the messenger, that their investigations don't prompt other independents to do their own investigation. They don't have to replay what that station is showing, but they should do their own investigation. Let's take the latest scandal, without going deep into it, about the grade changing or the saying people were attending classes that they either never showed up any day. There were even a couple instances of kids who were unfortunately dead that were still being claimed as being in attendance at these schools. Now, that particular station pulled this out 2 years ago. Now, the school system just 2 months ago said they did an investigation and discovered kids weren't coming to school, but were being marked present. They acted like, the school system acted like they just did this investigation. It was just discovered 2 months ago, when we obviously in the city had been seeing this on the news for 2 years. And now they're claiming that they discovered it 2 months ago. And no one else practically has given any credit. There are many times that you read an article or see a story online or even on broadcast where people say this story is attributed to Associated Press, Be More News. In other words, they give credit to the first persons who actually did the work and discovered this news. But in Baltimore, even our news agencies seem to be in collusion with the bad guys. And that's what I see too much of, Donnie. I see the bad guys making the decisions and the good guys keeping their mouth shut.
So I want to paint a scenario. You mentioned Be More News, and I thank you for that. Being a member of the Black Press Corps, I got to mention the Afro, the Baltimore Times, you got DMV Daily, you got WEAA, you got Kenny Brown's Northwest Voice in Randallstown. In DC, you got the Washington Informer.
Right.
Given those Black news outlets, here in Baltimore, as we talk about Fox, before Fox, there was the Baltimore Sun, Channel 11, Channel 13 cohort.
Right.
If the Baltimore Sun printed it, you were likely to see it on Channel 11 or Channel 13. That was a sort of trifecta.
Right. It was almost verbatim. If you saw it in the Baltimore Sun, one of the TV stations would basically read the news exactly as it had been written by the Baltimore Sun.
So in addition to the trifecta, you now have Fox.
Yeah.
The trifecta, which is mainstream, is not Black owned. Fox is not Black owned.
It is not.
And so when you mention, Be More News, and I'll throw in the other Black media, I guess I'm asking, how important is the voice of the Black media in a majority Black town where we're outnumbered?
Well, it's hugely important. Donnie, you're a little too young to remember. You remember part of this, where we went to the Afro-American to get the news. We had 3 newspapers daily, right? We had the Baltimore Sun, Morning Sun, we called it, the Evening Sun, and the Baltimore News American. But still, and most of us got at least the News American because that was the most local in its coverage. And the Sun was more national, et cetera. But most of us still waited to verify what we read in the Sun paper on Friday. On Friday, when the Afro-American came out, then we read to find out what really happened. But we also read it to find out what our neighbors were doing. In other words, there were weddings, there were the fraternities and sororities, there was what's happening at Morgan and Coppin, and what's happening down the street and around the corner in our neighborhood.
And let's just throw in the Afro was twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays.
I'm sorry. You're right. Now I'm getting
so, but you might be able to go back. I mean, clearly better than me. It was twice a week, but they also had distributions in other cities.
Right, absolutely. So it was Tuesday and Friday, and you're right. It was in D.C., it was in Richmond, etc. And so we waited to get our real news, just a forerunner of Be More News. We waited to get our real news from the Afro American because they had reporters in the community, even
Credibility.
credibility, of course, and you also had uh, that good system of neighbors calling the Afro, or the Afro reporters, even the Afro upper management knew people in the community that they could pick up the phone and call and verify whether the facts were real or what was beneath the fact, as you would say, the news behind the news. The Afro would do that. And so, you had the true story from the Afro. And so it wasn't, quote unquote, considered mainstream in the larger community, but certainly within the Black community, it had what you just mentioned, credibility as well as. And so the Afro could correct bad behavior. Most of the educators at our city who were African American had to pay attention to the Afro American. In other words, if the Afro American had started to say that schools or educators are failing our children, then that would take on even greater significance than a Channel 45 would, because we would see each other in churches on Sunday morning. And certainly, if Sister Johnson was written up in the Afro as marking
She
children,
bought 20 copies and gave them
right,
away.
right, there would be trouble on Sunday morning. Reverend Jackson might preach against Sister Johnson on Sunday morning if the Afro said that she was committing fraud, because Afro would have checked it out. We believe the Afro, uh, the Murphy family, was in church with us, and so certainly it was a different era of self-check. That's not the term I'm thinking of, but you know where I am with that. But we would check ourselves, and we would hold each other accountable, particularly on Friday night, Saturday night at the parties, at the cabarets, and then on Sunday morning at church. And certainly within our community, we would talk about one another in a positive way, but also holding each other in check. That we had our, hate to use the term, but class distinctions. So everybody didn't go to everybody's thing. Many working class folk weren't at the same cotillions or cabarets or that folk making a little bit more money did. But people would hold each other in check, at least on Sunday morning, because everybody was at the same churches on Sunday morning. And so it didn't matter whether you're the janitor or the head of the whatever. We would check each other on Sunday morning.
But something has happened over the past 50 years, and it's a transmigration. People left West Baltimore and moved to Randallstown. People left East Baltimore, moved to Essex, moved to Towson. Some moved all the way to Pennsylvania. The Black church, they started moving to suburbia. I remember New Psalmist was down on Franklin Street. Then New Psalmist moved up to the Village, and now they up in Seton Park.
Right.
Empowerment Temple started, I think, in Walbrook High School, and they moved up to Primrose. Right. New Shiloh used to be on Fremont. They moved up a bit just above North Avenue. But as people started leaving Baltimore City, our best and brightest started moving out. And what we're left with here in Baltimore is people who couldn't afford to move, or people who refused to move.
That's right. Still our best and brightest, but they refused to move. And let me mention, Donnie, you and I like trouble. But before the churches moved, the pastors moved. Amen. Amen.
Amen. The gated communities.
Right. They left the communities. And then their church members felt that they could leave the community also. The pastors moved not only uptown, but out of town. And the pastor was living in gated communities before there were gated communities, quite frankly.
Who
And,
knew?
and we know that the pastor usually lived next door in the pastorate, right? In the not the convent, that's for nuns, but they used to live next door in the pastorate. And they started to move out of our neighborhoods, out of our communities. The pastors were the first ones to drive back and forth to commute, and weren't there when Sister Johnson needed a hand or a prayer in person, in the house, or the hospital. So not to slam my brothers and sisters, but I just want to give you remind you of that timeline. It wasn't the community, the congregation who left first. It wasn't the community who left the neighborhood where they could walk to their church.
I'm hearing you remind us that as integration, I'm 56. I remember 68. I was 3. I remember the riots.
Okay.
I remember we were over at Patterson Park in Landville. I remember the National Guard on the front. I remember tanks coming up North Avenue.
Yep.
We wanted to integrate.
Right.
And when we integrated, we weakened our coffee. We no longer, through my childhood, I remember black corner stores. I remember when they started being sold to non-blacks.
Right. That's true. That's true. And I don't know if we wanted integration so much as we wanted to be able to integrate. In other words, I'm not sure if I wanted to shop in someone else's store as the fact that I wanted not to be told I couldn't. And so there was a mistake in the fact that when integration came, that so many of us left our brothers and sisters businesses, left our brothers and sisters services, called other people to do very ordinary carpentry project or home repair services, because we had been denied shopping and using those services so long that even we began to wonder, well, this must be some really good stuff that they have, some really good products that they have, if they're denying it to us. And so it came to be found out years later that their product wasn't as good in some instances, definitely was not better. And certainly the carpenters and electricians and other craftsmen that we have been using all these years, forced to use them in a sense, were better in many instances, and certainly were more cost friendly than the guy now that we're going out to and saying, we want to, your ice has to be colder because you've been keeping it from us, so we assume it must be colder since you won't let us have it. But we found out differently. So I think many of us still would have supported integration, as it were, but we should have realized that in other communities, I know the Jewish community doesn't leave its community to go find another European or African American to do their work.
If they have a bad contractor, they just go and get another Jewish contractor.
That's right. That's right. And they look for it and they want to have it.
Whether they like them or not.
Right. Whether they like them or not. That's true. Because I know, because I have relationships in many communities. I know folk in communities who don't like each other, but they need new drapes. They say, call, Joel, you get the breaks, drapes. And I said,
now we do have some of that.
Right.
As the son of an undertaker, I know that an undertaker can bury in a family almost in perpetuity.
Yes, that's true. Since you bring up undertakers, there's only one undertaker in the community we just mentioned, right? Everybody goes to the one undertaker because they've decided that it's a small community, and so you can't have 20 undertakers because nobody will make any money in that community. That's how they figured it out. So they say, you're the undertaker for the whole community, period. End. That's it, right? We can have, 20 caterers, but we can only have one undertaker. And so, not to get too far off the subject on what we're talking about, I think that Black folk have to return to thinking of Black folk first. And Black folk have to hold other Black folk accountable. That's a big deal also, Donnie. When I was in business, I used to tell my customers, if you have a problem, come back and tell me what the problem is before just not, because what we would do in those days, as I recall, is that if a major company, retailer, Sears, Heck Company, any of those would do something wrong or we get bad product, we just go back to the same retailer and say, look, this is a bad product. And they would hopefully fix it. But we would keep going to that retailer each and every time. Whereas if a Black business made a mistake,
you get one time.
One time. Matter of fact, here it gets worse, Donnie, because if a Black business screws up, we don't go back and tell him.
We write it on Facebook.
Right. Well, now, instead of going back and saying, Mr. Stokes, I had a problem. The shirt, was dry rotted or something, and giving me a chance to fix that shirt, they don't come back to me. Instead, they tell 10 people at church on Sunday, I went over to that Stokes shop, and you know what I got? I got a dry rotted shirt. They don't say that they even tried to come back to me. And so I'm losing business.
Nobody ever said that in my neighborhood about every man's son, especially when I got my first leather jacket from there with my Baltimore Summer Corps money. It was a Black hipster, and I loved that jacket. I didn't know I'd been wearing pleather for so many years. A cat came up to me and said, let me put a match to it. You ever seen a pleather with a match to it? It's not a pretty sight. So I was determined to get my first leather jacket.
All right. Thank you, Danny. Thank you for that plug from back in the day. Yes, I was the proprietor.
Mondawmin.
I was the proprietor of Every Man's Son. And so, yeah, we were the first young men's store who actually had real products. That's not the
real
term.
Man. You had Swedish knits with the raindrops.
We had Swedish knits with real rabbit hair, fur on them. We had
and don't forget the gabardines.
Yeah, the gabardine. Yeah, we had some great jeans over there too. So, and we had to knock off all that stuff. You may not know this, but in those days when there were Sassoons and Jordache and all those designer names for jeans and clothing, they didn't make them in young men's and boys sizes. And so we would go buy those products, and we'd go to a manufacturer in those days, either in Philadelphia or New York, and we would give them what we had just bought and said, we need you to make 100 dozen of these jeans, just like these, use exactly the same stitching and et cetera. And you couldn't go up there and say, I need 60 pair. They wouldn't, change their whole factory floor for 60 pair. So we had to buy 100 dozen of anything, and they would run them and they would send them. And then those companies that I just mentioned would get smart. They said, hey, somebody in Baltimore is selling out our knockoff jeans. All right.
So y'all invented the game for China to take over.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears for a second. Can you take me back to the first time Bob Clay protested in front of City Hall as it relates to business? I want to stay on this business tip. And so my question is about the history of Black business advocacy. And the picture I remember seeing was Bob Clay had on this long plaid coat, but they were protesting contracts coming out of City Hall.
Yes, that was happening. Now, you caught me off guard. I can't remember the exact years that some of this was going on, but certainly we're going back into the 70s. when we're talking about this and protesting at City Hall that the African American community wasn't getting as much of we should get in terms of contracts and city businesses and support for city business. Donnie, the sin of what we're talking about right now is that we could protest right now in front of City Hall because every Wednesday morning at 100 North Holiday Street, the Board of Estimates are saying when they're opening bids or awarding contracts, what? You can't find any Black business people to work with? No, sir, we can't find any Black business people. What? You can't find any Black contractors or subcontractors to build that school that the taxpayers are paying for? No, sir, we can't find any Black contractors or subcontractors to do drywalling, to do electricity, to stand on the corner and wave traffic on. No, sir, we can't find any Black people. Okay, I move that we waive the minority agreement on that. All in favor? Aye. It moves right along. Every Wednesday that happens, Donnie. You know that. It hasn't significantly changed in the 50 years. It's more than a shame. It's a damn shame that Black folk who now have had all three of the seats on the Board of Estimates for as long as we have had those seats, still allow Black businesses to get shafted on a weekly basis. They still allow white business people to come in and say, we can't find anybody. We can't find anybody. And obviously there are.
How does this happen when Blacks are in charge? I mean, clearly we have to seem stupid to other communities. We control the seats. I mean, it's like the Democrats being in the White House. You have all of the power in the world. What's the problem?
I think it's integration. I didn't mean to come back there. I mean, I think
it makes sense.
I think it's the want of too many Black people that have the white man's ice. I think it really is. I think that there's something, and I know there's a term for it. I can't think of it as we're talking, Donnie.
Sellout.
Well, there's another word too. That's a good word.
Self-hate.
But it's the yes.
Nicole said it earlier. Here you go. She said they are afraid.
They have been bought and sold. Yes, they really believe the white man's ice is colder, Donnie. They believe it is. They honestly, I know that sounds stupid, but they honestly believe it is colder. They believe that if they bring the white man's ice into their refrigerator, and this is an old term, as you know, outdated. They don't have ice boxes at now, but they really believe that the white man's ice would last longer. That if we buy the ice from a Black man, that maybe we'll get 24 hours out of that ice. But if white man's ice, it will last all week. And you know how that story goes. That the Black man had been selling ice for the white man for years and years and years. He's selling but he decided to go out into ownership of his own, and he started getting the ice directly from the ice house and putting it on his wagon and selling the same ice that he was selling when he worked for the white man. But none of his Black customers would buy ice from him. And when he asked them, why aren't you buying my ice? I mean, it's the same ice. They said, no, sir, the white man's ice is much colder than yours. And we all know that temperature is temperature.
32 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right. Science is science. You can't have colder ice. It's when it freezes, it freezes. But self-hate is a pretty harsh term, Donnie, and I don't say that it's far from right. I don't say that, but I say that we've convinced ourselves that their products are better than our products. Um, I ain't gonna buy nothing from that nigga. I know it. I know it's the term. I know it's the show, and I don't want to be disrespectful to your show. But folk, I ain't buying nothing from that colored man. I'm not doing it. I'm not going to hire a colored man to build my roof. I'm going to get, a white, even a Mexican.
So you know who I blame? Some kind of way, education plays a role in this. And I'm going to get to my question to you. So don't let me forget about the role of the Maryland Department of Education. But Baltimore, you still with me? Froze up there a bit. I guess they zapped us. They always zap us when we get into good stuff. I'm going to remove you, maybe and come back in. But Baltimore has a strong history when it comes to Black business. I was just reading yesterday about Isaac Myers and the work he did. Isaac Myers, East Baltimore, born in 1835, free, born free, born free. Remember that song? He was born free. He was not a slave. 1835, 30 years before slavery was abolished. Isaac Myers had a ship caulking business right over there in East Harbor. He went on to form a ship caulkers union because Black people weren't being treated fairly. Free Black people here in the city of Baltimore. He formed this caulkers association. He was the first president. And then the second president was Frederick Douglass. I didn't know this until recently. Frederick Douglass was actually the second president of the Ship Caulkers Union. We have a long history in this town. Let me point out another fact. Baltimore had the largest population of free Blacks prior to the Civil War. So I mentioned Isaac Myers, 1835, born free here in the city of Baltimore. Not all Blacks were slaves. Not all Blacks were in slavery. So Baltimore has a long tradition of free Blacks, free thinking Blacks, Blacks in business, but we never know this today. Looking around the city of Baltimore, you got a Black mayor, Black city council president, Black comptroller. Who would know that Baltimore has such strong Blacks here? Because with these three people in charge, we're still not getting the contracts. Not at the level that we should. Why? Puzzles me. And then you look at public education, it's horrendous. I often wonder if Baltimore City public schools were majority white, whether white people will be tolerating this hocus pocus foolishness or not. In slavery, Nicole writes, this Black mentality was called drivers. Let's bring them back. There you go. Called drivers that would step in for the overseers. Today we vote these drivers in and they are killing the Black family all the way around. Mr. Stokes, I was just talking about Isaac Myers and how Isaac Myers was over in East Baltimore. He had a ship caulkers union, born free, 1835. We have a long tradition in this city of freedom. Not all Blacks were slaves here. Right. We also had a strong tradition of Black business. What happened to us? Well, I guess we answered it. Integration.
That is true, Donnie. We had
Locke's Funeral Home, oldest Black family business in America.
Wow, for a long time. Yes, we had the largest population of free Black folk at one time. Baltimore City was the capital of it, of African American freedom. But we also had a very tough dichotomy. We also had slaves in Baltimore, Maryland, at the same time that we had free people here, like Frederick Douglass and Isaac Myers, who ran a very successful business to everybody. In other words, it wasn't a Black business; it was a Black-owned business. But all shippers took advantage of the craftsmanship that was at the Isaac Myers shipyard. So yes, what happened to it? Again, I think that we lost it in the period that we were talking about earlier. We lost it in the 60s and 70s when people could go to the other businesses, and chose to do so. They chose to go to the other businesses. At the same time, they made it a very much a they began to talk against their own businesses, to denigrate them, to say when other people were afraid of losing business from the African American community, began to say, well, yeah, you can go to your brother, but your brother doesn't do as nice a job as I do. Your brother doesn't have the experience that I do. I will take care of you much better, and you can depend on that happening. And then we began to listen to that, or become crabs in a barrel against ourselves, as we talked earlier about being able to go to a major white retailer, have a shoddy service, a bad product, but we return to them week after week. But then to go to a black business and have something happen one time, and the store owner is never told that there was a problem, never gets an opportunity to fix the problem, but instead we're telling 10 or 15 other people that we had a bad experience and I will never go to that N-word again. We're talking like this, not the white folk. We're talking like this.
Let me step in for a second. Can you adjust your camera? You got a lot of headroom. I want to be able to.
Okay. Yeah.
There we go.
Sorry. Anyway.
So here's my next question to you.
Gotcha.
We have more black elected officials percentage-wise than most any city, state in the union. Why hasn't that benefited us, as I see in a DC with Marion Barry, Prince George's County? When I look at Atlanta, I mean, these are two towns that had a black mayor for 40 years.
Yeah, there are.
What do they understand that we don't?
It's part of the integration. White man's ICE is better theory, Donnie. You know, the first wave of African American mayors either were high school graduates or went to HBCUs. You're talking about Maynard Jackson. You're talking Harold Washington. You're talking Coleman Young.
Your namesake.
Carl Stokes in Cleveland, who was first. And so you're talking about men, Marion Barry, who you mentioned, the brother in Gary, Indiana. So you're talking folk who, as you would say, were unapologetically black. They would say black out of their mouths. They would say, I'm going to deliver to the black community. This is what we're going to do in the black community. They would say black. They would use the words. And some of these towns weren't predominantly black at all. Chicago wasn't predominantly black.
Although it was founded by a black man.
Yeah, that's right. It was. My brother, not Pierre, but you know the name. But anyway,
Jean Dusable.
Dusable. There you go. Good French brother from Haiti. But so we had that group of black mayors. The second wave of black mayors, Donnie, did not go to HBCUs. Did not. They went to Ivy League schools. They were into integration. They were into, I'm not going to be the black mayor. I'm going to be the mayor for everybody. That was actually coming out of their mouths. I'm going to be the mayor for everybody. Nobody before them who were not black were the mayor for everybody. Not one person was the mayor for everybody until these black next wave of mayors decided that they were going to be the black mayor for everybody, but not even a black mayor. And so I think that sense of integration seeped into their mindset. I think the fact that they, I don't know, this went to different schools.
Miseducation of the Negro comes to mind.
It does. The miseducation of the Negro, you're right. So now we're going to schools where black pride is frowned upon. Now we're going to schools where our history has been even more whitewashed. Now we're going to schools where we're talking about the Western civilization and the greatness of Western civilization and how we should emulate the Greeks and the Romans. We're talking about Shakespeare. We're not talking Maya Angelou. We're not talking Richard Wright. We're not talking the Harlem Renaissance. Yeah, we're talking Europe 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago. And so the mindset that we are now being shaped by is not a mindset of African American, Native American. It's not a worldview. When we were going to these schools, we were learning Western civilization, not world history, not history of other lands, but Europe and this very young thing called America. And so we were westernized greatly and proud of it, proud of it. We were proud to declare ourselves an American, as if that changed what was actually happening in the street. We were still being segregated. We were still being put down, but we claimed that we were American. We claimed that we had the same freedoms as everybody else, even though the reality showed us and told us that we didn't have the same freedom, that we didn't have the same opportunities, that we were being constantly denied. But I think some of us began to think if we act like they're acting, then we can convince them that we're like them. And so
Okay.
it persists until this day. It persists until this day. Right now, Black folk are in charge of police department, schools, government, every aspect of government, And yet, what is happening in the Black community is prospectively worse than it was in the 50s.
We've moved backwards.
We are. So, we are 40 years. The Black community in Baltimore looks worse than it did 60 years ago. Worse. Penn North. What was Pennsylvania Avenue in the day when there was no integration?
The only place we could go.
It was the cultural hub. The cultural hub. Folk came from other places to come and visit Pennsylvania Avenue, right? When jazz was king. I mean, jazz was the popular music of its day. Jazz was the music that the radio stations played, that people danced to, that people listened to. And yet, someone like Duke Ellington couldn't go to dinner on the St. Paul Street, a block away from Johns Hopkins University, places that I visit now. What's called, Charles Street Pub. It wasn't called that then, but Ellington wasn't served. And to be honest with you, maybe we have a quote right to walk into any place we want today, but you can still notice a difference in some establishments in terms of service. But we certainly know that our neighborhoods look worse today, many of them in East and West Baltimore, than they looked 60 years ago.
So we got to take all of this education, history backdrop, and now pose this critical question to you about next year's gubernatorial election.
Uh-huh.
Who do we vote for?
That is very difficult. I think that folk have to come to us not with a perspective of what they're going to do going forward. I think somebody has to show us what they've done already. What have they done already?
Nobody's done anything for Black Baltimore.
Well, that's true. I'm not sure that.
Well, am I missing something? I mean, I hear these names
Right
on both sides of the aisle, all races. I get it. But this Baltimore, I've been here 56 years minus 2 years away at college. I ain't seen you.
Listen, I know that's true. I know that's true. I know that and I don't want to get squarely into that race, but
now you're my best friend.
Say it again.
But now they my best friend.
Oh, okay. Okay. We
never supported my business.
Right.
Never came to an event. But now you my mans in them.
I hear you. I hear you. I do remember people like a Bob Ehrlich who gave Coppin State University more money in his 4 years than any other governor has given in their entire career. Matter of fact, Coppin got more money under Bob Ehrlich than they received from the state in the entire history of Coppin State. So
that part right there. That part right there.
Right. So how do you do that? How do you do that? And what's been the follow-up? I mean, why did we have to fight with Black leadership being what it was? Why did we have to fight for the HBCU money? What? How does that happen in Maryland? Maryland is, no Democrat can win in Maryland without the Black vote. None. We've got almost 40% of the vote, which is going to be split up. But if the 40% African Americans, and we vote, we're not a monolith, but we do vote close to a monolith. We vote 90%.
Would not have been an Ehrlich or Hogan without the Black vote.
Neither one. And so the Democrats ought to recognize this. We can take it nationally, but I know we want to stay local as possible. But the same thing, the difference between Hillary winning and Biden winning was Black turnout. I mean, it's not a myth. It's right there in black and white. Hillary lost Detroit. She lost Philadelphia. She
didn't campaign in certain places, including Michigan.
Right. And it's not all Michigan. It's Detroit, right? It's Philadelphia. It's not all Pennsylvania.
She acted like Kathleen Kennedy Townsend did when she lost to Early. Like, right. Black people, you're going to do what I say do, and that's it.
Right. Yeah. You just take it for granted, and you ought to lose. And Black people find it hard to vote against the Democrats. So they do in their minds the next best thing. They don't vote at all in that particular election. They just don't show up for that particular election. And it is, of course, a quandary. The quandary is that when we vote for white folks who pay no attention to Black folks, and yet we vote for Black folks who pay no attention to Black folks, and Black people start giving up. They say this system doesn't work. And that's not a good thing for the Black.
I won't say I'm all the way there, but I do write that in my new book that I Am Black Wall Street, that I have more faith in our businesses, like your business. Every man's son, I have more faith in our business ability than I do in politics. Politics, it's a long game, and we got too many of us who sell out for chump change. And not to mention those who go to jail for 15, 20 grand. It's like, damn, I ain't going over to jail, and I damn sure ain't going for no 10 grand.
Right.
Now, Kathy Pugh had a better idea, but I still ain't going to grand for 800 grand.
Right. I don't want to go down that road for me, but I'm just saying, there's got to be I won't even go down that road, but you're right. So first of all, we're not making the decisions. Donnie, let me tell you, there were two major projects where Baltimore taxpayers gave away $1 billion combined. One is
Port Covington,
Harbor Point in Baltimore, and Port Covington. The taxpayer, and others like us, gave developers $1 billion in taxpayer money. And added to that, we've given them about 25 years of not having to pay any property tax. Right?
You didn't vote for that?
No, sir. I did not vote again for it. I fought as hard as I could. Not that I'm a hero. There were others also, but not enough. There was a situation where we didn't have to give them $1 billion. You understand? It wasn't as if this was $1 billion that was already on the table, that was earmarked for these developers to have the money, and there was no way out of it. We actually gave them the money. We gave them the money. They didn't steal it. They didn't come in the middle of the night and take it off the table. We said, let's give them this money. Let's not ask them for jobs, or if we can ask them for jobs, but if they say no, we say, oh, we tried. We didn't take from them affordable housing commitments. We said, we asked them, would they build 20% of their housing affordable, not poor housing, not low-income housing, affordable housing, meaning the salary of a school teacher. And we said, would you build 20% at least affordable housing? They said no. What did we say? We tried. We tried. They wouldn't give in. We tried. Now, we have the $1 billion. We have the $1 billion. It's on our side of the table. The only way for them to get the billion is if we slide the $1 billion across the table within reach of them. And Donnie, that's what we did. We did that twice while I was in the city council. We gave them $1 billion of your money, taxpayer money, plus we told them you don't have to pay taxes on your property for 25 years. Meanwhile, Miss Jackson, who lives next door to you, who couldn't pay her exorbitant water bill, is going to have her property taken from her. Her home, which is worth maybe $15,000, but it's all she has, she's going to have that taken from her because she couldn't pay the water bill or the taxes for this particular year. Stuff like that makes you crazy angry, crazy mad. And Donnie, we got to find a way to punish people that we send the city hall or the state house who do not act as if they are unapologetically Black.
So who do we like for governor?
Didn't we have that discussion? I don't know yet.
Has anyone piqued your interest yet?
I have conversation with Peter Franchot. I'll be honest. Rushern, I think Rushern has proven that he's a very, very capable administrator. Certainly, what he did in Prince George's. You are correct, and we have to examine who's done what for both.
He might be going for that congressional seat that now that Anthony Brown wants to be Attorney General.
Well, yeah.
Because Rushern did poorly in Baltimore.
He did. Well, he didn't.
He did poorly in PG too.
He didn't campaign well. That.
Didn't he come to Baltimore with Martin O'Malley?
I'm not sure. You may be right. And my memory doesn't serve me well there.
It's not the guy I would pick to ride around Baltimore with, but that's just me.
That's just a whole bunch of views, okay? But so it's tough. Honestly, I'm not trying to duck this, but if you ask me again in, let's say, March, I can have a probably clearer, more definitive answer. I don't want to mislead. I have had conversations with Peter Franchot, and I've had good relations with Peter Franchot. And there are other people in the race who are friends. Wes Moore is a friend and certainly a gentleman and a good gentleman. I don't know that he has enough to prove himself in terms of his relationship with.
Well, here you go. You were on the council when Andre Bunley ran for mayor, weren't you?
I was.
He got, I think, 32% of the vote. But what I remember, having been the one time I ran for office was 98. I ran for state central committee. But those who brought me in the game taught me that it really wasn't even a question, that you started state central, Then the goal is to move up to delegate. Then the goal is to move up to state senator, so on and so forth, or state central to city council, and then city council on up. In other words, you got to pay your dues. You gotta, and you learn some very basic things in paying your dues, like knocking on doors. They say Nick Diadamo's formula was that you had to knock on every door in the district at least 3 times.
Well, and I think that's true. When I first, I told you my story earlier of how I decided to run for office. Now, I went to a church with Dew Burns. Dew Burns and I were at St. Francis Xavier, the oldest African-American Catholic church in America. We went to church together. Dew was my basketball coach when I was 12 years old in a CYO league. And so I decided to run. Dew was
What's CYO?
Catholic Youth Organization.
Okay.
Right. That's the place where all the dancers were coming up. All the young people like the Catholic Church. Not that they joined, but the Catholic
discos.
But the Catholic Church had dances, once a month, and the teenagers came to St. Francis Xavier for the dances. We had the best basketball program. Roberta March was a drum major in our band. So anyway, there was always fun at
the young Roberta March.
Yes. The mom.
Wow.
Yeah. But anyway, so I took myself off track by going back in history. But what I was going to say is I went to Dew and I said, Dew, you're our city council person. You get ready to, run for president of the city council. We're close to one another. I had never been in politics when I decided I was going to run. I was a business owner and I was working in the community projects. And I said, Dew, I'd like to run for city council. Dew said to me, he said, Carl, I'm going to vote for you, but I'm not going to support you because you've never worked in my club. You've never gone door to door with me. You've never asked people how you can help and work on a constituent community problem with them. You don't know what service is in terms of politics and community. Now, Dew knew that I'd run a basketball program. He knew I'd run a tutorial program. He knew I was in business successfully, but I had never worked on the street helping to solve people's problems. And Dew says, you come into my organization and you work community work for 4 years, and then you come back and we're going to, get you elected. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I said, I'm already better than everybody in your organization. I was a smart little kid, I own my own business, etc. I said, I'm going to go right now, Dew. He said, okay, go ahead. He said, I'm still going to vote for you, Carl, because I know you so well. And so just exactly what you said. There was a system. And, we blew up the clubs and we said that, they were holding people out. But in fact, you can make a case that many young people that we're electing in the last few years have no idea what community service is about. They come in to do politics. They don't come in to do community service. And so they're failing. They're failing because they have no connection to what the average man and woman wants and need in their daily lives. They're downtown making policy decisions, not based on Mrs. Jackson not having the money to pay her water bill, which is way too high, not making decisions based on the fact that the young guys can't get a decent employment and work and able to sustain themselves except in the illegitimate market. They're not making those decisions. They don't even feel what most of their constituents feel day to day. They're making a very nice salary from way up from the time when I was originally in the council. Their jobs, which used to be part-time when I was there, I had to work another job. they're no longer part-time in terms of salary. They still, many of them, not all, many of them still treat it like a part-time job. And there are 5 or 6 people in city council right now who do this full-time because it means that much to them. But folk don't have the connection. What Du said to me, Carl, you're not ready because you're not connected to the people in the community the way that you need to be. You have to do service first. It's almost like Jesus Christ. And I'm not trying to go that far, but I'm saying that there are preachers who would never deign to wash the feet of their congregants. And Jesus told his apostles when he kneeled down to wash their feet, and Peter said, I'm not worthy. And he said, brother, if I don't wash your feet, you're not going into my kingdom. And so Jesus showed that humbleness. And I think that many of our politicians don't show that humbleness.
Humility.
They expect people to say, you're the Lord, you're the liege, you're my leader.
And you never saw them in your neighborhood.
Never. Not until they were knocking on doors one time during an election. And you don't know who they are. They don't know who you are. You know, if you're an elected official and you're at a community meeting and you can't call one name in that community meeting, nobody's name, you know, you got to lean over and say to your aide,
Who is that?
Right. You don't deserve that job. You don't deserve that job.
Big brother, I have seen people run for governor and they bring in some non-blacks from out of state into the black community and said, vote for my candidate. First of all, who are you? Secondly, what makes you think I want to hear what you have to say?
It's crazy.
And you're not from here.
Right. And without naming names, there was a campaign for mayor, a couple of them, who called me up and said, hey, Mr. Stokes, can you introduce us to community leaders? Can you show us who's, I said, wait a minute, who are you? They said, well, you know, we just came in from Pennsylvania. We don't really know the community. We've been invited in by the candidate.
But our candidates pay these people.
Right. They pay them to be the field operation. I said, you're the field operation and you don't know 10 people in the community? And you want me to just take you around and say, you're my people? They say, oh, no. You don't have to endorse us. Just tell people that you're okay with us.
Oh. Did they offer you a check?
Donnie, you know better. You know better.
They didn't bring a check?
They didn't bring a check or an ink pen.
They lost. They lost.
Right. They did.
Miserably.
Well, yeah, they did lose. But how can you hire people from out of state to run your field operation?
Because they didn't have a teacher like Clarence Dewburns, who my daddy always told me was the shower man over at Dunbar. And when he lost to Kurt Schmoke, I'll never forget that. I wish my dad were here, but he told me he was voting for Dew. He said Schmoke should have waited his turn, allowed the man some time. That's what my daddy said. He was Dewburns all the way.
I hear you. And the weird thing in terms of Dew, and you mentioned something. So that may be your next book, Donnie. Doesn't Dew deserve a book? I mean, here's a man. Here, you say shower, and that dresses up a little bit. Dew was the guy who he gave you the towel when you're coming out of the shower room and you're wet. Dew was the guy who's standing there giving you a towel to dry yourself off with. That was his job, his full-time career job. And this guy became the mayor of the city because he told me and other young people, you have to put your time in doing service to the people first. He understood what it meant to be an elected official, what it meant to give service to people. Dew was the right guy at the right time. I think the citizens might have been the wrong people at the wrong time. Not taking anything away from Kirk, he deserved to be mayor, but there ought to be a history of Dew Burns. Is that not an inspiration to go from the guy handing out the towel to the guy who's the mayor of the city?
Well, see, that's why we need black media, because Dew deserves a statue. Harriet Tubman deserves a statue. Frederick Douglass, Isaac Miles, they deserve a statue. But I don't want to get this all from you this time. We got to cut this show short, but we got to bring you back as we get closer to the election season. And you're always welcome here. But let me just say this for the record. You have always supported Be More News. We have not always agreed. You never said, well, if you don't agree with me, I'm not going to. You've always supported me. I wish we had more like you. Thank you for supporting Be More News.
Appreciate you. I appreciate honest. You and I don't always agree, and that's okay. It's totally okay with me because again, we're in the same tribe, to use a Chappelle term, right? But we're and like I said, why are we fighting out there against our own interests? Our own interests, meaning our own community's interests, not our own individual interests. We can disagree about our interests individually, but we can't fight against the broader community interests. And I appreciate you for that. I appreciate you being honest. I appreciate you being held accountable. I appreciate the fact that when my daughters say leave their daddy alone, you left their daddy alone, and I'm smiling on that because I mean it. That there's no more important thing when people ask
they love their daddy, and you have coached me on being a father to a black woman. You've coached me.
Thank you, brother. I mean, these things are automatic. It may not be that we learn it. We learn it from others, obviously, and hopefully our own family. Just you had a great dad. I can tell. I never met your dad. I know you had a fantastic father. Look at you. I mean that. I don't mean that to just puff smoke. I mean that. How could you not have had a great father? How could you? You can't come through that like that. And so I hear him. I see him. Again, I never met him. But I can tell that. And so anyway, I don't want to take more time. I appreciate the fact that we can discuss, that we can disagree. But at the end of the day, even when we're disagreeing, we know that we're going to come out of this together. We already know that. Even when we're disagreeing, you and I both know that when we come through this disagreement, we're going to be together, that we're going to work on the betterment of the African American community without doing harm to any other community. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is not to hurt somebody else for our benefit. Our purpose is to benefit ourselves. That's what it is. I thank you, brother, for being honest and accountable.
And likewise, big brother, we've been talking with former Councilman Carl Stokes, Baltimore City. My name's Donnie Glover. We'll be back tonight for the Donnie Glover Show at 7 p.m. All the best to you, Mr. Stokes. We love you.
God bless you, brother. Love you. Be well.